Farmer Tom here. Welcome to the Farmer Tomcast. Today on our ongoing series, Heroes of the Green, we have Tim Blake. How you doing today, Tim?
Excellent. How about yourself, Tom?
Doing well, doing well. So the world wants to hear your story, bud, so I'll hand you the mic and let her rip.
We'll start from the beginning, I guess. I started smoking cannabis in 1971 as an eighth grader, and my family was in San Jose. We moved over to Santa Cruz, Capitola on the water when I was a freshman, and we lived right downtown in a three-story building that was the old bar down below, and my parents lived up on top. And right in the middle of town in Capitola, all of a sudden you had all these hippies and all the artist stores and all the rest of it. My mom opened an art gallery right down there downstairs. I took over the old bar in the keg room, put some black lights up in there, had the pool table in there, and it was a wonderful little spot to be. And so all the hippies, you'd call them back then, started smoking pot with my parents. My dad was a lawyer, and so I was kind of the cool kid because my parents were cool. And the next thing you know, I started dealing as a freshman and a sophomore with all these you'd call older hippies that would probably be in their 20s at that point, so I was the kid, like a 15-year-old, 16-year-old. And that's kind of my start. And so we had a wonderful kid. I finally started picking up, back then they were kilos, 2.2 pound bricks that we were picking up. And I'd go to SoCal High School as sophomore, junior, and senior and sell, you get 32 lids we'd get out of there, and I'd sell 28 of them. But we plus the 2.2, about 34, 36. And I'd sell about 30 of them and keep 6. And then we played pool all weekend with all my friends and the girls and sit in the black room. And we used to close that room up and think if we kept it closed enough and we didn't breathe, we'd get higher. I'm surprised we never pass out in that darn room. But that's what we thought back in the day. So it was a pretty idyllic life for me growing up there. And it's kind of my introduction to cannabis. And then fast forward a little bit, all of a sudden those younger hippie kids and were 20s and stuff started being part of the massive network and distribution of all the Thai weed, and started out as stick, Thai sticks, and all the Mexican and all the Colombian red, all that, the hash coming in. And I worked under all of them, through my early 20s and into my mid 20s and stuff. They had loads coming down the West Coast and dropping off, 50 to 100,000 pounds in Seattle, Portland, up in Eureka, San Francisco, Santa Cruz. And they'd bring these loads in, and people would split those loads up, and people would get 25,000 pounds, and then, 4 or 5 people get 5,000. I was the youngster at the bottom getting 1,000 pounds, when I was 20 years old, 21 years old. And it was such a beautiful business. No guns back then. You'd get your load and you'd sell it for 13, and you pick it up for 11, and boy, you'd make $100,000. I was rolling back then. And it was a really amazing life that we kind of grew up into the mid and late 70s. The DEA hadn't started yet. It was really not that much risk. There weren't any minimum mandatories. There weren't any private prisons. That rolled into the early 80s. And then, of course, the DEA, which had been activated in camp, but they hadn't really fired it up yet. It was about the mid 80s when all of a sudden Biden came in and helped lead the development of the private prison system and the minimum mandatory prison sentences. And I had a guy come in there. There were several families. You had the hippies, and you had the Italians, and you had the Jewish families, and I worked for all of them. I got along with everybody. And this one guy that was working out of Big Sur with the Big Sur Holyweed people, he came up and showed me the first indoor. It ended up being known the Grease, the Chronic, and the Magic. And it was a super pot. I'd never seen anything so frosty, but he said I had to give up a third of my crop for 6 crops. And that what was going to happen, it was over the next year and a half, he said they were going to bust all the loads coming in, and they were going to replace it with cheap cocaine. And we were going to have to grow indoors that you see under a Safeway and grow this clone that he had. And it was incredulous. I couldn't believe it. I'm sitting here, I got 1,000 pounds in my backyard. I'm thinking, we're going to grow under lights you see in a Safeway indoor. It was unfathomable to me at the time. I had to go back and then pick up that clone 18 months later and beg for that cut because they took out 12 loads in a row. And it was an incredible journey that took place. I had a friend who got busted with 6,000 pounds, and he did I think 7 months in Elmwood, the county rehab in San Jose. A year later, that was a 10 to 15-year prison sentence. And so we watched the whole thing come in. And, they also not only took out the people like me that were dealing the loads, but they took out the inner cities too, because they replaced that all with cheap crack and cocaine. And they really devastated the inner cities. And that was the mid 80s. And then, of course, we started doing runs from Arizona, Bisbee and down there, because they were trying to, smuggle in all the Mexican, because that's all we had left at that time. And so I made a number of runs down there, but that was a dangerous deal down there. You had to come out of southern Tucson, Bisbee down there, and you had to drive up past all those federal agents that were eyeballing you. And after about 3 or 4 runs, I realized that was not going to last long. And so I moved up to Northern California in 1979 and started growing like everybody else. That's really what, I'm sorry, I started in 1979, but I mean, I moved up here for good in the early 90s and moved up here permanently. But that's what really started the real large scale farming up in Mendocino and the Humboldt and the Triangle. I mean, we were doing quite a bit, but it was really the taking out of those loads and that massive amount of cannabis that was being brought in from all over the world that made a huge void and really blew up the Triangle at that point. It exploded. But then again, at that time, that's when camp really got activated too. And they really started coming after us back then in the mid 80s. And they really started hunting us down. And all of a sudden, it wasn't so easy for people to get away, with growing outdoors either. That's why really a lot of people don't realize that, but a lot of the cannabis, the big scale stuff got grown indoors in the 90s. I moved up and did 100 light indoor grows myself because it was really kind of tough to do a large scale outdoor grow during that period of time. So I'm sure you remember that.
Yes, sir. Why don't you take us all the way up today? The starting of the Emerald Cup and continue on.
Well, what happened was I came up here in the early 90s and started doing those 100 light grows. And then what happened is that in the beginning of 2000, what they allowed them to do, up until then, you couldn't find an indoor grow. You could see it from the planes with the heat seekers, but they couldn't use that as evidence. So they had to get somehow a snitch to come in or find a way to bust you to get into the indoor grow. So it was a pretty safe thing. Then all of a sudden, they let the heat-seeking federal planes come in. And in Mendocino, they wiped out the indoor within like 1 or 2 years. They busted 3 or 4 big loads that winter and just took it out. Everybody realized that they weren't safe under the trees anymore. Those planes could see the 100 lighters or the big ones going. Humboldt kept them out for a few more years. They didn't let the feds in, so they kind of got to go on for several more years. And about that time, early 2000s, I was talking with some friends and said, we'd like to have a friendly contest and celebrate the fall harvest and do this. And people thought we were crazy. I mean, High Times wasn't here. They were like, man, you're going to get busted. You can't do a cannabis competition, a celebration of the fall harvest. It's illegal. And I have a little place called Area 101, 10 miles north of Laytonville on the highway, 150-acre little campground with a place in front. And we just decided to do it. Of course, we didn't put out a poster that year. It was just word of mouth. It was disguised as a birthday party. And so it was really underground. Had a couple dozen entries, couple hundred people. A lot of people showed up in mass. Everybody thought we'd get busted, but really nobody knew about it. And so we got away with it that first year. And that was really the beginning of the Emerald Cup. 1 flower contest, personal use, some judges sitting around one night, no vendors, sponsors. It was very simple. It was just a very basic, fun thing. There was no pressure. Yeah. So the second year, we came in and we did a flyer. Like I said, put it on the backwoods. We made it an all-night party. That was the beginning of the psychedelic nature, where we started doing psychedelics at midnight, go until the morning. We had a thing called a survivor's breakfast. Anybody that was awake in the morning, anybody still up in the morning, got a free breakfast. So we kind of turned it into a psychedelic party. But I came into the room, and in the corner, some friends were over there all huddled over, and they weren't really kind of looking like they were totally cool. Something was wrong. Something was going on. And I walked over there and realized that even though we weren't going to let them do a hash contest, because back then you'd also go to prison for 10 years for hash, my friends were putting kind of an underground hash contest right in the middle of our cannabis competition. And what could I say to them? I just kind of let it go because I couldn't stop them. And that was the beginning of our first hash contest. And then Ringo Lawrence had come in to sell seeds. And back then, the same thing. If you had more than 100 seeds, you'd go to jail. 1,000 seeds, you go to jail for 10 years. And so my partner Marv made Ringo kind of shut down and not sell seeds. And I didn't know any of this. Ringo got really offended, left, and I didn't know till months later that it was Ringo, the famous Ringo Lawrence. And we made a friendship out of that. I apologized, and I let him come in the next year. So that was kind of the second year. And the other aspect that was really interesting was that the CHP was running up and down the road, and he had noticed all the cars. And so he stopped, and my guys told me, got the CHPs out there. And I thought, we're going to be in trouble now. We had cars all over the freeway and stuff, but we're up in the middle of nowhere. And back then they didn't have backup or anything. And he looked at this and he was telling me people were driving out with pot smoke coming out of the cars and stuff. And he's like, I have no idea what's going on. I could smell the smoke. I can arrest these people. And just then my friend started introducing the awards and talking about a purple Kush. And he said, I don't even know what's going on in there. I want no part of this. You got to get these people out of here. And I tried, but they wouldn't do it. They just rebelled and said, we're not moving. We're not doing anything. And so he didn't come back. He drove up and down a bunch of times and let it go. But that was kind of the beginning of us becoming a public event, and then of course the years just got bigger and bigger. We started with 23 entries, and then boy, we became 48, 58, 73, still a small contest and only the flowers for a number of years. And personal, there wasn't anybody selling, back then nobody could sell cannabis legally. So it was all underground. Very interesting thing. And it became bigger and bigger until we had to really move it because it was just too big for Area 101. So we moved it to the Mateel. I went up there one year, and that was the biggest show they'd ever done there. And that was with rain. We had rain and snow, and we still had the biggest show at the Mateel. But they couldn't let us come back the next year because they had events planned. We couldn't get a deal with the fairgrounds at Humboldt or Mendocino. So I took a flyer, and we went down to Sonoma County and asked them if they'd let us in. And we had no idea that they would. My girlfriend wrote up a 22-page proposal that they said that was the best they'd ever seen with me. And they said, if you'll do a cannabis country fair like this and keep the rap and hip hop and the metal music and everything else out and just make it kind of, mainstream, we'll do it. And that was the first year we went down to Santa Rosa. And half the people in the Triangle thought I abandoned them and that I deserted them. But when they heard how much business all the people that went down there did and how it was to interface with consumers, all of a sudden it went from a mountain friendly competition harvest ball party to a consumer event that was sales. And it was big. That just exploded in Santa Rosa. Then the next year, everybody wanted in. And that peaked in 2017, where I think we estimated they did about $20 million through the vendors that year. The average person was doing about $100,000. It was really incredible. So that's when it really kind of peaked for that. Legalization came in, and boy, we all know what happened with that. I voted for it because, Gavin Newsom came up and told me that he'd never allow large scale farming like they promised in Prop 64 for 5 years. I shook his hand. He came up to Humboldt and promised all that in person. And so I said I'd go for it because I had a lot of friends that had done long-term prison sentences, and I wanted to see the mainstream be able to reach out and feel comfortable with cannabis. And I thought that if we had 5 years like they spelled out in 64 without any large scale farming, we'd all be okay for 5 years. But 2 months into 64, Gavin and all his cronies opened that up. And we all know what happened. Immediately, land in Salinas went from 20,000 an acre to 80, and land up here immediately was on its way out. We were doomed from the day he did that. The writing was on the wall. So very, very sad turn of events, but it was spelled out right, and we meant to do it right. And that's what 64 was spelled out to do, no large scale farming. But I realized politicians will shake your hands and lie to you. And I haven't trusted a politician since that day.